Wipe the shit out like detergent. Either that or we burn it. 'Cause freedom for my people is urgent. Think you know we deserve it. News come, news goes. Till we fire when the screens close. News come, news goes. Till we fire when the screen's frozen.
Everyone, we're just going to wait until more people come and we'll start in about 3 minutes.
Don't keep it under the surface. Freedom for my people is urgent, but we can't get discouraged. Peace has a price, hope it's worth it. Tell us be quiet then disturb us. Don't be nervous when they see us switch lanes and swerve it. With diamonds under the dirt here. System don't deserve us. Freedom for my people is urgent, and you know you deserve it. You got a taste of the war here now, but that ain't even the worst yet. Freedom for my people is urgent.
Okay, I think we're going to start. Sarah, if you could turn the music down. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for coming and spending your time with us and being in community with us. Thanks for joining us. This is the 4th teach-in for our Breaking Silos teach-in series. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes up top orienting folks to the space before really at the very beginning, I'm going to pass to Megan so that they can share with folks how to access the Spanish interpretation. Go ahead, Megan and Jose.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Megan, estoy aquí con José y vamos a estar haciendo la interpretación simultánea entre el inglés y el español. My name is Megan. I'm here with Jose. We will be providing Spanish-English simultaneous interpretation. Because we're practicing language justice in this session, we want to ensure that people can speak and listen in their preferred language. If you want to listen and participate fully in English, go to the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, click on that globe and select English. Do not mute original audio. If you joined on a cell phone or a tablet, you will need to look for the 3 dots in the circle where it says more at the far right of your menu. Click there, select interpretation, and then English, and then done. Ya que estamos practicando justicia de lenguaje en esta sesión, queremos asegurarnos de que las personas pueden escuchar y participar en el idioma de preferencia. Para escuchar y participar plenamente en español durante la sesión, pueden ir al icono del globito en la parte inferior de la pantalla, hacer clic allí y seleccionar español. O si entraron a través de un celular o una tableta, hay que ir al menú a la extrema derecha donde dice más, con 3 puntitos. Puede tocar allí, seleccionar interpretación de idiomas luego español y por último finalizado para que se guarden sus preferencias. If anybody has trouble with the interpretation function, let us know in the chat and we will help you fix any problem you might be having. Si alguien tiene problemas con la función de interpretación, háganoslo saber a través del cuadro de comentarios o el chat. Así les podemos ayudar a solucionarlo. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Megan. So my name is Em Lawler. I use she and her and they and them. I join us from Chicago on Potawatomi land. I am the Senior Training Manager and Counsel for the Repro Legal Defense Fund. And I'm just going to do a little bit of framing for all of us before we get started. So first, this is a webinar style, so only the speakers up here are going to have access to video and mic, but we would love for all of you to be as engaged as possible. And so we'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, and things that resonate with you. One way that you can do that is using the chat feature, because that's going to be available to comment or affirm anything that's shared. And you can also use the Q&A function to ask any questions. I do want to flag to please be mindful that the chat will be recorded and also posted. So please don't include any information in the chat about personal details about you, your loved ones, or anyone's legal case. If you have questions regarding those things, you can email us afterwards. In addition to the, we'll also have Q&A at the end. So in addition to the chat, there's a play space has been created. So that's going to be shared in the chat now. Thank you so much for Elephant Circle for creating this. Please open it up. The play space is a really beautiful parallel space to process, ask questions. You can color, you can tap into learnings, you can tap into the insights and the resources of this session. So co-create with us, add to our shared Liberation resource library. Thank you. I really do suggest that you look at it and you open it up because I think it's a really beautiful way to kind of process and learn what we're doing today. So I want to share with all of you guys also the kind of framing that we're going into this session with. So we want to center this conversation around immigration enforcement as a system tool of oppression, understanding that tool on a deeper level, and then using this moment to better understand the immigration system itself and its function in people's reproductive lives and families. Talking about its particular oppressive features and mechanisms. And really, we want to talk about, we don't want to use immigration talking about it as an add-on, but really understanding it as an inherent tool of state violence when talking about reproductive justice. Immigration justice is reproductive justice. It's about the state's controls of people's bodies, their bodily autonomy, of our communities, and familial connections. We understand immigrant justice to be a global and a local issue. Liberation and reproductive justice for the people of Palestine and the Congo is tied to immigration raids, ending family separation, and providing abortion access to all in the US. And with that said, of understanding that both globally and locally, we want to make sure that we localize knowledge. And so we will also be discussing clear things that you can do and we can all do in the spaces that we live and we work and we spend our time. So that's the framing that we're bringing. So we're really excited. I'm going to introduce our panel now. We're really excited to have Sikli Shah, the Executive Director of the Detention Watch Network, Zena Zamora, the Executive Director of the Frontera Fund, and Abraham Paulos, the Deputy Director of Communications and Policy of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. The conversation today will be facilitated by Nuran Elzarka, the Senior Helpline Counsel at If, When, How. So I'm going to pass it off to Nuran.
Thank you so much, Em, and thank you all for being here. I feel very lucky to be in this space with you all and with our panelists to discuss a really important, have a conversation around immigrant justice. So I do just want to note that all our amazing panelists' biographies are in the play space. That way, if you want to spend more time learning more about all the work that they've done, it is in there. And also, if you have any questions, again, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and I hope that we have some time towards the end to answer some of those questions. So we'll get into it. I think, a big reason we're here today is to make sure that we're thinking about immigration enforcement as a central system that's also needed to understand reproductive oppression and family separation. I'd love for us to hear from our panelists about how we should approach that learning and kind of where they want us to start and the important connections for us to make. We know that all incarceration, detention, deportation is family separation. So I'd love to just have them, start us off on how to think about that framing and approach that learning. So whoever wants to start, I'd really love for this to just be a conversation, and whoever feels comfortable going, please go for it.
I can go first. Hi, everybody. My name is Zaina Zamora. I'm the executive director of Frontera Fund. Frontera Fund is an abortion fund that works in Deep South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. We help people navigate abortion care for anybody living in border communities in Texas, so from El Paso to Brownsville. Whenever I think about these systems, in my mind, I always think of it as like this really complicated, interconnected web, almost like synapses of like neurology, right? None of this exists in a vacuum. The same systems that we see and the same people that we see that are implementing policies that are like anti-immigration are the same people who are implementing policies that are anti-abortion, are the same people who are implementing policies that are like anti-LGBTQ, especially against the trans community. So and it's all very interconnected. And so whenever I think about the work that we do and just reproductive justice, it really does kind of fit in almost every little space that we can think of. And so when I think about immigration, I just feel like I'm fighting the same people who also implement these anti-abortion policies that we deal with every day in Texas. So yeah, that's kind of how I always come to these spaces of just thinking of it like it's all the same. It's like, they're all interconnected, and that's how I always kind of frame it in my head. And I'll pass it to whoever.
I don't know. I can go ahead. Great to be here with all of you. Really great to be on with Abraham and Zaina here. And yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of, I think at Detention Watch Network and a lot of the work that we're trying to do is often kind of not see like everything that Zaina was saying. It's like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so much of the existence of immigration detention specifically is because of the expansion of mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex over many, many years. And I think that, there's a lot of different connections to be made, but one thing to name is that, I think there's a lot of conversation right now, for instance, with the Everglades detention camp in Florida and all these potential new facilities popping out. But for the most part, when you look at the immigration detention system, like the vast majority, like there's only probably a couple dozen facilities or maybe a dozen facilities that aren't former jails and prisons or currently existing jails. And so like every facility was a state prison at some point or a federal prison at some point or is currently a county jail that holds people. And so this idea that immigration detention is like this aside is just false. It's actually very much connected. And then similarly, when you're looking at policing, so much of what we're, the way these systems have operated is this sort of intersection of the criminal legal system and immigration over many decades now, which has included having local police become immigration enforcers through programs like the 287G program, which people might have heard of, which became law in 96 and started being used after 9/11. But also just by having like ICE agents have really strong interactions with jails. Sheriffs really see themselves as like one of their core roles as protecting the homeland. I think sheriffs in particular play this role. And so I think when we're looking at all these different systems and how they're connected, one thing to really understand is how much it's not, they're not actually separate in a lot of ways, and all of them, their ability to work and their ability to work in this way is those collaborations. And you see that in the family policing system. You see that in the way that people who like that experience for people who are seeking abortion have relationship to police or other entities. So like all of these instances, there's a lot of different intersections. The other thing I'll just name quickly, and I think, so much of this is about who's deserving and who's undeserving, and that's how all these systems sort of operate. Like who is deemed deserving, and then who is deemed undeserving, and who's deemed undeserving is often expanding, expanding, expanding. So as time has gone on, we just expand the number of people who can be subject to these policies, and that's their goal, and they're applying it to people seeking abortions, to trans people, to immigrants, to Black and brown people, like Indigenous people, working class and poor people. Like that's kind of the bigger category. You can keep going on, and a lot of this sort of narrative around public safety is so sort of central to how all these systems work, and it's often a lie that's being told when actually people are just trying to survive and they're being considered disposable. But the thing I wanted to mention on family separation in particular, because it became such a hotbed issue, and maybe Abraham will have more to say about this, in terms of like the 2018 conversation. So in 2018, there was this policy that was implemented to separate families, a zero tolerance policy that meant that like families that came to the border, their parents would be prosecuted and sent to either a U.S. Marshals jail or like some sort of ICE or CBP holding facility, and their kids would be shipped to like a detention camp. And this became, like it's when Abolish ICE blew up, when everybody was like, oh my God, look at these quote unquote innocent families that are not deserving of this, but without sort of realizing. And then everyone really made this about Abolish ICE. But the reality is in so many ways, this was about the infrastructure of border militarization at the border in particular, but also U.S. attorneys and prosecutors and the U.S. Marshal Service and all these other entities that were playing a role because they were using this law that was created in a sort of like eugenics era policy in the 1920s to say these individuals cross the border so they can be without documentation, so they can be criminalized, they can be, have a sentence. And then after they do that, then they can go to detention. So just to say there's all these sort of layers to this. And I think often one of the challenges when you're talking about families, when you're talking about, the contact these particular vulnerable populations, it leans into innocence frameworks, but that ends up actually not totally serving us. So I think that's, where I'll leave it for now.
Thank you, Silky. Thank you. It's good to be in community, Zaina, with you also. I'm so ready to learn a lot, and I already have, and it's only been a couple of minutes. So yeah, I mean, I think of family separation as it's a very important tool for white supremacy and state violence. In fact, it's like that is the goal, to break our spirit and to break our people and the community up. And this has been going on for quite a while. And I can understand, especially right now, that things feel complicated, but there are lots of threads and patterns that have been here since the beginning, right? And even with the concept of what citizen really is, 1791, they were like out the gate, like, oh, Black and brown people cannot be citizens, right? And today they are disproportionately the ones that are locked up in prisons and cages. And not only that, but family separation was a tool during slavery and also during the genocide of Black and brown people for a very long time, right? And I think that even when we think about what is citizenship, we always have to challenge white supremacy on that. And they did during Reconstruction, which gave us the 14th Amendment, which they're trying to take away now, which dealt specifically with the children of Black people, right? Which dealt specifically with the children of slaves. And even to this day, that amendment, right, was rooted in the fight for Roe v. Wade. And so we've always seen that the way that this white supremacist, very violent government has always attacked our families, which is the most intimate space for us and the most intimate space for resistance. We also saw this during the civil rights movement, right? When we see that white supremacy again is being challenged, we knocked out the national quotas that they had during the 1920s that Silky brought up, that was rooted in eugenics, They also brought up family reunification for the first time in immigration, where they said it, like if you've got relatives, you can bring them sort of together, right? And so I just sort of think that there is this thread, and I think that sort of the last thread or the last era that I always go back to right now is sort of the war during the 90s and the 80s, right? The war on drugs decimated Black and brown families in this country. The war on crime, right, which built that mass incarceration that Soki was talking about. All of these networks of prisons have been here for a very, very long time. The war on poverty, right, with this issue of the welfare queen, which actually increased poverty in our communities, which also increased crime. The last time that Congress basically passed a comprehensive immigration bill was 1996, right? The Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. The name is long, and IRA is what we call it. But what that did was essentially gave us the mandatory detentions of why people can't come out of Alcatraz or Alligator or whatever the hell that they're calling it, right? And even in the war on terror, right, which happened only about 2 decades ago. So all of these wars, right, that have been going on for a very, very long time. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic. I do want to check that. Like, I'm not calling it a war. Congress got together and called it a war, right? So that's their language. And I think we should approach it and act accordingly to the language that they are using, right? And I sort of feel that even right now, what we have been seeing for the last couple of years is that the crime rate has been going down. And so essentially, we really had a crisis of empty prisons and cold weapons. Our police force has only sort of grown, right? And so what we're really seeing, I think, right now is sort of that using criminalization, and I can speak more to that later on, but I just really want to, I think for me, there's a saying is that we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are, right? And so like that's the context that I put sort of all of this into, is that they've been separating Black families on the plantation, brown and indigenous people since the beginning. And you can see, right, how that they have always been trying to break that spirit. And right now, we're just in a situation, right, where we are sort of in a new mode, right? Out of all of the local wars that they put in, that they are already locked and loaded. And, unfortunately, I do think that it's going to get worse before it gets better. But there, at the end, we'll do the there's rainbows at the end of this, right? So we'll do like what we can do. It's context time. So, and it's not looking good. All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Abraham. And I think you took us to exactly where we need to be in talking about criminalization and the ways that we're seeing it and how to fight it. So we know that every interaction with the police or the family police or any child protective services worker makes families more vulnerable to ICE. So if you all could share a little bit about how we're seeing criminalization and how we can fight criminalization in all its forms. I'm thinking a lot about the different ways that people may not be able to travel to get the abortion care and health care that they need, and how that means increased surveillance. So I'd really love to hear a little bit more. Zaina, if you want to start us off, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So I'll speak to my experience living in Texas and living in a border community that's long been over militarized and over policed. And just from the experience we hear of people navigating abortion care on our helpline. So when Texas passed these anti-abortion laws like SB 8, and which was the 6-week ban, and the total abortion ban after Dobbs fell, we saw it really limited people's ability to travel to get abortion care, and especially those who are living in who have undocumented status or who come from mixed status families, right? For those of you who may not know, and surprisingly, a lot of people don't know this, along the southern border in states like Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, I'm not sure about California, but there are internal border patrol checkpoints, right? So 100 miles north of Mexico and Texas, there is another checkpoint that people have to go through to leave our communities. Like, for example, if I want to drive to San Antonio or anywhere north of me, I have to go through a border patrol checkpoint where they ask about your citizenship status. Growing up, I didn't know that this was not normal. I thought this, like, everybody went through this, right? It's not normal. It's just like a southern border thing. I don't know if they have it in northern borders. So, again, speaking to my experience, but um, that really limits people's ability to be able to travel for abortion care. If they're unable to get abortion care here in Texas in clinical settings, how are they able to travel out to get abortion care if there is a risk of detainment or deportation, right? So a lot of people who are undocumented or come from mixed status families are kind of forced to stay in a pregnancy, or they seek other ways to get their abortion care through self-managed abortion, which is, again, can be very safe and is a very effective way to manage your abortion. But again, there adds like a level of risk and criminalization, right? You have to be able to you have to be able to source the medication for yourself. You have to find trusted community members to help you. There is a lot of fear and risk about going to healthcare providers if you have any questions about, how do I take these pills? What happens after I take these pills if the abortion isn't successful or we're having complications? Texas has laws in place where public hospitals are required to ask about things like immigration status. And although people are not required to answer those questions, it does add a level of fear of being able to seek out any kind of care, right? And not even just abortion care, care in general. So it's a very interesting thing to witness people navigate these kind of systems. And people who are undocumented are very aware of what they're having to face, and they might not be aware of like specifically anti-abortion laws, but they're very aware of what their status entails for them to have to travel or to how to navigate, the geography of Texas or any other place where there's a lot of anti-immigration sentiment. So it's really interesting to see, and a lot of people are honestly just kind of taking care of themselves in the best way that they can, and we try to share resources so that they feel protected and safe, but it's very complicated for them, not to mention other things like language barriers that people face. A lot of people have never had to navigate traveling through an airport or things like that. Like, it can be very complicated for them.
Abe, do you want to go or do you want I can jump in. I mean, one of the things about how immigration enforcement has worked for a very long, like it's kind of there's like this ebb and flow with immigration enforcement, and a lot of it often depends on who is in office. So if you have um like during, going back, we're gonna go back in time a little bit to like the Bush era, the sort of goal was to kind of have both the sort of spectacle and also merge the criminal legal system and immigration system more. So both things were happening where there were home raids and they were massive worksite raids and where hundreds of people would be caught up in the system and get prosecuted. Um, and also be put in detention and all the other things. But then there was also a growing sort of intersection between county jails and immigration, where more and more, like the county jail became like the gateway to the deportation machine. So people having any interactions with law enforcement would mean that they would be put in the deportation machine, and that was like not really seen in so many ways. So the criminalization was this thing that was like, and people felt very shameful about this, so people weren't talking about it often too. So for many, many years, that's kind of how it happened. And especially in the Obama years, that's what really ramped up. We saw more and more of this sort of, you know, this program called Secure Communities and other programs that sort of tied immigration and criminal justice system together more, and more people were funneled into the system, not really in the public eye. And there was these attempts to make certain locations like hospitals or schools and other places like quote unquote sensitive locations that people wouldn't be targeted, but we do it sort of more behind closed doors and not in this way. Whereas now we're in this place where they are really, really obsessed with the spectacle. They have this sort of like pathological obsession with deportation. And so they want to show people what they're doing. And so I think the criminalization's kind of at every stage, like Noran, you were talking about. I mean, like ports of entry, any sort of going to airports, going, often like Amtrak, Greyhound, all those places were places in the past. And all those places were places, but the question of who's targeted in the scope, and even just now, ICE put out a policy that, many undocumented immigrants who came into the country without inspection could now not get bond hearings. So even they're expanding some of those like, war on immigrants that Abraham was talking about in the 90s. They're just expanding this more and more to apply to large categories of people. And so I think I think in terms of criminalization and how it's operating, I think we have to think about all those different places where people can be targeted and understand that, any interaction with law enforcement, and this is why, it's not a perfect system, but like sanctuary policy has been so effective at actually bringing down deportations is by saying, look, actually not having local police have this ability to target large categories, not having detention centers in an area, because the other thing that happens, and this is what we've seen over time, and have a report with Immigrant Legal Resource Center on this called If You Build It, or If They Build It. But basically, whenever you have a detention center and community, if you have like a capacity of 50 people who could be detained, people are 2 times more likely to be targeted for deportation. If you have a capacity of 850 people who could be detained, you are 6 times more likely to be in, potentially detained. And so I think the thing to get there is that detention exists to facilitate deportation. So having that capacity is such a big piece of this. And this is why we're trying to get all this money. And I think often, I think this comes up, especially for lawyers, there's this tendency to think about the individual and the experience that they're having and how to prevent that experience. And often our way of approaching reforms is like thinking about that individual and how their experience could be better. But sometimes what ends up happening is the reforms that we offer, like alternatives to detention, which now are like a tool that the Trump administration is using to surveil people and bring them into the system, or having nicer facilities, which just expands the system. Like those things have lent itself to more expansion, more scope of people in some form of surveillance. And so I think one thing that abolition really teaches us is like really looking at the system as a whole and understanding that, yes, there's laws on the books, but sometimes they can ignore those laws and they don't have to do all the things that those laws said, which we've seen time and time again. But it's really that infrastructure and that money and those resources also that play such a big role here, which is why this moment is so scary. And so I think really when we're trying to interrupt criminalization, a lot of it is, yes, that work that we do in community, but also stopping that expansion of infrastructure is so key.
Thank you, Zana. Thank you, Silky. Damn, there's so much I want to say, but I'll stick with the criminalization part. Because I think that's like very, very important. Because all that does like is create monsters, right? And it's supposed to be the creation of monsters, and this government has done it for a very long time. I mean, if you look at the Black Codes, right, which came through Jim Crow. If you look at the criminalization of the indigenous population, that has basically put them into a situation that they are now. And what criminalization basically means, in the most simple term that I can break it down to, is that it's an adjudication of some law, right? A lot of the time it wasn't legal before, and it's the enforcement of it, right? And as long as you're able to do that, you can then build prisons and get more police. And this country has been just so amazing at doing that. And what it does is that it is meant to exclude us from civil, economic, and social life. And we saw this recently with the felony disenfranchisement laws, right? And for what those essentially mean, and I can make a parallel to what they're doing right now when it comes down to non-citizens. What the felony disenfranchisement laws essentially said, right, was that they adjudicated the law, which was the crime bill, right, and the 1988 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, right? So there was these two laws, they adjudicated it, and then they enforced it, which gave us mass incarceration. But they weren't done with that yet, right? So once you leave prison, they can't lock you up forever, though they have tried, right? Is then you come out into the world, and what is it that you can't do because you have a felony? You can't get housing, which we see that right now with HUD and Department of Homeland Security making a memo that basically is trying to kick immigrants out of public housing. I almost said projects, but public housing, right? No employment when you have a felony. You have to check a box. And right now we see this through the work rates, right? Essentially doing that. No voting, right? With the felony disenfranchisement law. So there's basically restricting your avenues to engage civically so that you can change the things around you or the politicians that you have. And then also no school, right? With the felony disenfranchisement laws, right? And so what you see is the Department of Homeland Security and this administration, right, going after all of that to make life as miserable as possible. Now, going back to this issue of the monsters thing, I think somebody had mentioned in the chat something about changing the narrative to show people that we aren't criminals, which I actually just think, I think it might be better to show people that we are in a way, right? And what I mean by that is that these things are meant to make monsters. And you could see that with the campaign and the election campaign that Trump folks did. They didn't even say, most of the time, they didn't even say immigrants or aliens. They were just like, these are murderers, right? Rapists and whatever have you. As Black people in this country, we know that language, right? And that language is to isolate family members, right? And to say that, well, everybody who's locked up, everybody that's got a crime is this sort of monster that's lurking as their neighbor, right? And we know that the first law that Trump had signed was the Laken Riley Act. And that's exactly what they're doing again, right? So it's an adjudication of this law that basically says something about shoplifting. I don't get into the details. I just know what it is, right? And to be able to lock up undocumented immigrants for a certain type. And I think that law around the shoplifting ties directly to the Black codes around vagrancy, right? And basically when they would accuse Black people of stealing anything and put them into prisons like Angola in the South or what have you. And so the question then really becomes, right? And I still see it in the media and it's sad, but I get it because people are scared and they're really just trying to say, you know, every day I get some report about immigrants being locked up and it's like, well, I think 6% of them only had criminal records or only 20% or 35% of them. And I'm like, well, that Laken Riley Act is going to make sure that that 6% becomes 2%, right? And so what they're going to do, the plan is to make everyone a monster, right? Or to make everyone sort of this thing. And how do we alleviate that? I mean, I think one thing we've got to say that this is a structural issue. This is not to say that harm is not being done in our community, and it is, right? But I think what the abolitionist narrative is really thinking about alternatives, right? We know that the only thing that has solved crime that is proven by research and data is anti-poverty reduction programs. When people aren't broke, right, there's less crime, right? What a coinky dink. When we look at when people have housing, when people have food, like these are the things that will sort of help us out, right? And I mean, I'm not going to sit here and be like, you've got to love these monsters, which I mean, I could use some too. But I think just to really understand, right, is that this is exactly what they want us to do. And so the media, even those that are essentially well-meaning, well-intent people, right, are still scared. And they're just, the point that they're all just trying to make right now is that he was supposed to go after criminals. And the point that I would say that I'm like, criminalization, it's the adjudication of law and the enforcement of it. I was like, they're gonna make us all criminals so that you can go to sleep at night and not come for us. And I really also want to tie this also is that learning about what happened during the Black Codes, the convict leasing, what happened during the war on drugs and the war on crime, right, will really help us understand that that Black people were sort of the test lab for this, as they usually are into it, right? Sort of the meth lab to be like, what can we do, right, to be able to have police and prisons, and in the end, separate these families so we could break their fighting spirit.
Yes, thank you. And I think what I'm hearing is that like the thread in all of this is the language of dehumanization and how much oppression relies on dehumanization. And just thinking about what we're seeing right now, it's like painting people as quote unquote criminal also means people with the wrong tattoos can be, at risk of deportation and family separation. People with the wrong thoughts or opinions are now also at risk of like family separation and incarceration. And this like mental gymnastics of constantly trying to convince people that they are inherently less than because of some small or reasoning that like the state determines is true. Maybe we can spend some time talking about the specific tools that immigration enforcement systems use to control bodily autonomy for folks who are at risk of state violence. So just really thinking about like family separation and incarcerating children, kind of this language around dehumanization, and some of the ways that immigration enforcement uses, tactics to continue to control bodily autonomy.
I can jump in, just because I mean detention in and of itself is like a key central tactic, and I think when you look at the history of at least the modern detention system, which started in the early 1980s in response to Haitian asylum seekers coming to Florida, especially also Afro-Cubans coming at the time, and so there's this large Black population coming, and what happened at the time is that the government was like outwardly being semi pro-immigrant. The Refugee Act had passed, but then at the same time denying asylum to Haitians like categorically, systemically, right? And their argument, like basically at some point, a lot of people were just like, this is racist. You're just putting a lot of Black people in detention centers indefinitely in South Florida. What are you doing? Like Reverend Jesse Jackson came, all these people were like, what are you doing? And the argument that the government then made was like, well, we'll just apply this to larger categories. So it was like the logic of anti-Black racism and racism more generally that then got us to a place where they were like, we're going to expand it to Central Americans who are fleeing US-backed wars. We're going to expand it to more and more populations, and detention starts to get bigger. Mandatory detention eventually becomes law, and all the things that have happened that Abraham and I have talked about. But so that's all to say, like, detention itself is like a key tool and a key strategy around this. And I think the thing about this last 6 months, and even before, even what we were seeing in last year's election with Biden and Harris, is that there was and what Trump was doing, that so much of what was happening was a vilification, again, of many communities that have been on the receiving end of U.S. foreign policy. Haitians in particular in Springfield, Ohio, or Venezuelans generally. It's very clear that that's sort of what was happening and got us to a place where the Laken Riley Act passed. But I think the thing to name about this last 6 months in particular is that detention, this place where they fully control people, and I know there was a question about reproductive rights and care in detention. I mean, that is non-existent, like especially now, like detention conditions are horrendous in so many ways. People are not getting medical care at all, period. And there have been numerous deaths in detention in just the last few weeks. I mean, we are seeing this system, accelerate in a way that is significant compared to what's happened in the last 45 years that got us to this place. And so, but the thing that's important to understand about this moment and this sort of question around, how detention is operating is that it's become also a testing ground for the Trump administration's authoritarianism. So when you look at cases like the international students who were detained, like Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeysa Öztürk and other folks, like so much of that, there was a lot of it that was like what people experience every day. You know, being picked up, feeling like you're being kidnapped, being transferred to a faraway detention center, being separated with your partner who might be pregnant, you know, all those things, being arrested without a warrant, all those things are actually everyday realities of immigration enforcement. But then to target somebody and say, okay, and being a green card holder even, and not even being convicted of a crime, like actually all those things are not normal. Like that's what we got to after 96. That's what we've kind of been in since then. But then to be targeting people for what are essentially thought crimes, like that is where you're seeing these sort of test cases in these test subjects. And then similarly, you see people being transferred to offshore to a mega prison in El Salvador without, you know, any, I mean, not even like everyone's like without due process. It's like due process is so non-existent in all these ways for immigrants in the system. But so like nobody deserved that. Like even if they went through due process, they didn't deserve that, right? And so I think that's the thing that's like the shift right now, and really understanding how much detention, like this ability, this like pathological obsession with mass deportation and mass incarceration has got us to this place where we're now $45 billion more to this system that is essentially like making it so people don't have any ability to have control over their lives or stuck in this system. And often a strategy to sign people's rights away and say, I'm going to deport because I don't want to be in this like horrible, horrible system. So I think, you know, the goals in so many ways, and Abraham was saying this, is like their goal is to take immigrants out of the public sphere in every way. And so it happens by making them live in fear, making them potentially self-deport, and then putting them in detention and where they are either going to be deported or they might not make it out. And so all of that is what they're trying to do. And by expanding detention to this scale, they are going to do it at an even greater scale, which we're already seeing.
I can go next. I love everything you said, Silky, even though it's all awful. So, and going back to like the question about reproductive health care and stuff in detention centers, it's really interesting to me that a lot of these organizations like ICE, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and Customs and Border Patrol, they do have policies in place that kind of outline how they're supposed to care for individuals in detention and in their care. But these policies aren't enforced, and they're often just ignored or just completely worked against, right? So there's, as Silky said, there's been a lot of instances of non-treatment or forced treatment without consent. There was issues in, I think, a Georgia detention center where a lot of women were underwent forced sterilization, non-consensual forced sterilization, which again has long been a tool of white supremacy to kind of implement some sort of population control. There's also been an expansion of Trump using, and this just happened in my community, like literally a couple of weeks ago, the national defense areas, which are typically used around weapons research and manufacturing areas around weapons, what's it called, where they're like weapons test sites and things like that. And now they're using them, they're kind of expanding that tool to use for border and immigration enforcement, right? So now we have these areas that are national defense areas along the border. They have one in New Mexico. They have one in my community now, where we're using things like the military to enforce civilian laws, and so that creates a whole other level of criminalization that we just haven't seen before. So I think that's really interesting about how he's kind of using these powers to test the waters to see how far can he use his military powers to enforce immigration laws. So I thought that was really interesting as well. Um, and I think also when you look at the specific tools that they use, a lot of them, a lot of people who are in immigration cases are forced to use certain apps that do like facial recognition. They use tools like AI to do facial recognition. They use tools to kind of like read through social media to kind of like pinpoint people who are talking, against the Trump administration, who are talking about pro-immigration policies and using that to kind of police people's language and things like that. And also the use of just dehumanizing language. And when you say, like, I'm not sure if it was Abraham, I think it was you, Abraham, who talked about how they use language a lot to kind of criminalize us. Like they always call us illegals, right? Like, and when you think of illegal, it automatically brings to mind like criminal. Illegal is a criminal thing, right? So using that like really dehumanizing language to kind of other us, and also using the language to kind of frame what is a good immigrant and what is a bad immigrant. There's also like the model minority type of framework that they always try to kind of impose on us, right? And saying things like, well, they're really hardworking immigrants, where it's like it's not just about what they contribute to our capitalist society. It's the fact that they're human beings and they deserve their rights and they deserve respect and they deserve their autonomy, right? So I think that's some of the things that we're seeing in this type of the situation that we're in now. And again, speaking to the people in detention centers, it's very difficult for them to get care, especially if they're in a banned state. So there's detention centers like all over the country, but if they're living in a banned state and they want something like an abortion, they have to be taken out of the state, sent to another detention center in a non-banned state, and then try to get the care there. And whether or not the Trump administration, I'm sure they're not going to enforces that policy, is I seriously doubt that that's going to happen. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I thought Silky and Zaina did an awesome job. Nothing to say here.
Thank you. So going off of that, can we talk a little bit about how we have to think about reproductive justice and immigration justice as a global struggle and kind of the ways that our movements can work together? We know that authoritarianism works through law enforcement. So just the importance of really being able to work together and think about this as a global struggle. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Abe, do you want to start us off or or do you?
Sure. Um, I was curious to hear what you guys were gonna say. Um, and well, I mean, I think the global struggle part, I think that's very important on a couple of levels. I mean, I think one, we're seeing what is now like deemed as the externalizing of asylum, but I like to call it externalizing of the enforcement of immigration, right? And we're seeing that particularly deep down into Central America, in Panama in particular, where there's now like a detention center there. Also in Costa Rica, we've seen what's been happening in El Salvador. So the U.S.'s sort of addiction to incarceration to solve problems to it, like with incarceration, is now being contagious, right? And everyone else is now getting a hit of that horrible, horrible drug. And I think what we're starting to see, right, is that the Western world in particular, right, is sort of looking at these black and brown people from their former colonies, right, who are thinking for themselves, who are now going back into our history and sort of saying, yeah, you know what, that was completely unfair, and we would just like some fairness. And you can't have any of that, right? At least not for these Western world. And so essentially their whole idea, right? We see this happening in Christmas Island in Australia, right? We see it in Lampedusa in Italy, right? Is just sort of the cage, right? Becomes their way of holding back the subjects from the former colonies, right? And I think that that global struggle will be there for a very, very long time. I recently heard a statement by basically saying that migration is a part of our decolonization process. And I actually kind of do believe it to a certain extent, right? Is us understanding that these borders that they came up with were essentially to solve white people problems in Europe. And they've never solved our problems in what we have. And so looking at how other people around the world, right, are fighting against this idea, right, abolishing the idea of a border, abolishing the idea of a prison and a cage is really, really helpful, right? And also the tactics that they fight against authoritarianism, right? Do not obey in advance. Everything comes at a price, right? And also understanding the importance of sacrifice. And I think that what we're seeing right now in other places, right? People getting kidnapped, body snatchers, like, warrantless arrest and what have you. We came from those policies that were Western policies essentially to subjugate our people and rob us of our land, right? Put in dictators to be able to do that. So these tactics that we're sort of seeing now, we're in a situation where we can now link up, particularly in the Black diaspora, with that struggle. We can now say, hey, like it's full on. There is no more sort of the line is blurred, right? To the point we can say like, all right, this is authoritarianism, right? And you could see it in the big, beautiful bill. One thing I noticed, and I'm sure others have, is like for the Pentagon budget and the military budget, right? They gave $156 billion. And then for ICE enforcement or immigration enforcement, they gave $170 billion, right? Even though that's going to be over 4 years, but those numbers are out there, right? And if you're really looking at it by sort of saying, okay, certain parts of the world have been fighting against US militarism for a very long time, which basically comes in the fashion of weapons and cages, right? And for them to essentially pass this bill that basically says, the $156 billion for the Pentagon and the military is for 1 year, right? So it's like, we're not there yet, but we're on our way, right? And I think what this does is also links us up, not just the global struggle, right, of folks that have gone through US imperialism, but also the CIA dirty wars in Central America, right? But also intergenerational, right? What our aunts and uncles went through, what our grandparents went through, fighting sort of the same beast. And I think that there are, if not, right, ways that we can sort of connect and sort of say, yeah, they've been doing this for a long time. And I think, to bring it back, the last point I wanted to make was to comment on what Zaina and Silky have said, sort of this idea around reproductive justice and where that is. And also to let people know that there was a generation of Black people that were born in prison out here. And when it comes down to sort of Black women that are giving birth who get drug tested 10, 20 times more than anybody else. And if they test for drugs, they take that baby away, right? Again, that separation of families is essentially to, break us down, right? And I don't think they're going to win, but $170 billion means that like we got to think differently, right? I'll leave it there.
Um, I'm glad you went first, Abraham. I feel like there's so much to talk about here, and I can keep it brief because I know we're kind of going into time. But I think you know, I think one of the biggest challenges for the immigrant justice movement is that so much of the investment and money and approach for the movement and all the ways it's been operating and then the sort of like mainstream context has always been, at least for the last 20 years, um, has been pushing this idea of comprehensive immigration reform, and the way they do that is to really position the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant, or the old immigrant versus the new immigrant, and all of the narratives lean into this sort of, you know, patriotic, and as Zaina was saying, this sort of like respectability politics, hardworking, patriotic, like innocent, etc. And it's really unfortunate because it's isolated, and similarly how a lot of our movements in the U.S. are very isolated. It takes away from a long history of internationalism within the migrant justice work in the U.S., especially in the 1980s, during those wars in Central America, where actually the sanctuary movement was very, very internationalist and really understanding the role that the U.S. was playing in that region, and doing that work to help people in that process. And I think it's something powerful us to sort of understand, especially with, as Abraham was talking about, the offshoring of detention that we're seeing now, and it's sort of extension of what we've seen in the U.S., which is we're going to detain somebody here in New York, but then send them to Louisiana or send them to Oklahoma or somewhere else. Like now they're like, we're taking them even further, and you know, taking even more of their rights away in the process. Um, I think there's the Amy Césaire quote that a lot of people have been talking about lately, which is like the boomerang effect in discourses around colonialism. The book that he wrote, like basically the idea is like you see this happening abroad and then it comes home. And we've seen this, and I think Gaza is a particular example, especially when you look at the sort of systems of control that have been used in Gaza as being like a laboratory for a lot of the things that are now being used on the US-Mexico border. And so that, like, we can't, I think it's actually really, really hurt us to not have a more internationalist sensibility to our work and our approach and have those relationships. And even now, as the detention system is shifting in these particular ways, like I think we're really reckoning with some of those questions and how we do that better, because obviously there's not a lot of support for that. But I think it's so essential. And again, this sort of years of denying this idea of root causes, or this idea of like all the reasons why this happened, like has kind of gotten us to this point. And then the last thing I'll say is just like, Noran, you said this, like fascism operates through law enforcement. And so like whoever is the quote unquote enemy, and people are deemed enemy populations, and, immigrants, women, trans people, people seeking abortions, people who, are poor and working class, all like the way they do this is through law enforcement. And so I think we need to really understand the role. Like there's this way that Trump is seen as an aberration, but it's actually just the buildup of these systems over time that have like enabled this, have paved the way for this in a lot of ways. It's going to levels that are, even for me as somebody who's like studied this and seen this, I mean it's hard to totally take in. And so I don't want to deny how severe and scary things are right now, but I think we have to do better this time. In those first Trump years, again, everyone leaned into innocence frameworks, but if we don't understand the role that these narratives that Abraham's been talking about, that Zaina has been talking about, like if we don't push back against those and like reject the lie that immigration is a public safety issue and that these things are about national security, or all the other lies they tell, then I think we're not going to get to a better place. And so I think that's going to be such an essential part of this.
And I'll just add for me, when I think about like kind of thinking about immigration justice and reproductive justice in a global framework, my mind always goes to like things like climate disasters and climate change that we're seeing like on a global scale, a local scale, obviously, and a global scale. That's going to create a lot of forced displacement of populations, and it could happen to us. It could happen to anybody living anywhere. And we're going to be forced into places that are unknown to us. We're going to be forced into laws that we might not be familiar with. And it creates this kind of forced immigration and a population of immigrants that weren't necessarily seeking out to make that immigration, right? I also think about, the US imperialist system and the wars that are created abroad and how it creates really unstable, it destabilizes communities. You have things like rape used as a weapon of war. and it creates, you know, a lot of horrors and things that women and children are having to face like on a global scale, right? So that's kind of where I think about when I think about, just to keep it like really, really brief, when I think about immigration justice and reproductive justice. Um, and also thinking because of the community I live in, how Mexico is so in the US narrative, Mexico and people from Mexico and people from Latin America are often seen as criminals and we're not the right immigrants and all that stuff. And now the US is people from the US is using places like Mexico where abortion is more accessible and cheap to go over there and get their care, right? So I saw that also when people were talking about these anti-abortion laws and using places like native reservations to create abortion clinics there, and it's like we displace them, we don't give them any care, and now we're expecting them to take care of us, you know, like things like that. So I think it's really interesting to think about it all like on a local level and also how it just kind of perpetuates across the globe.
Thank you all. I know we've spent a large portion of this webinar talking about how bad it is and how scary it is, but I also know that you're all doing really, really amazing work to make this world better. So maybe we can use this time to talk a little bit about a handful of things that we can all do to build and dream together of a better world and a world that's just kinder where family separation doesn't exist.
No one
We're
wants to go
people
first.
like, oh
It's a
yeah, go
hard
ahead,
thing to
Dana, you
think.
go
I was
first.
going to say, it's a hard thing to think about, right? To dream of a better world, especially considering the world we're living in. Um, I always think of what do I do for myself? I take things in like little steps, right? So take care of your mental health, especially for those of us who've been in this struggle for a long time. And I always try to think about the historical struggle as well. Like, we're not the first people who have gone through these types of struggles, and we definitely won't be the last. So, putting in that perspective, but some actionable items that you can do: support your local abortion fund. So, there's abortion funds all over the country. Support your local abortion fund. Volunteer for them, talk about abortion, learn about the laws that are in your community, um, learn about, you know, talk about, find doctors that you trust, talk to them about abortion, figure out like who is a trustworthy person in your community. We also say at Frontera Fund all the time, chisme, which is like gossip in Spanish. Chisme saves lives. Um, so talk to each other and kind of share those resources among your community, your like your immediate circle and with other people. Um, and yeah, get involved with the organizations that are doing this really, really good work in some way, whether it's just by donating or sharing their Instagram or social media stories. And have these conversations with people in your family and your community. um, Learn about what type of language is best to use to kind of destigmatize immigrants, destigmatize abortion, destigmatize criminalization and family separation. Or not, don't destigmatize that, it should be stigmatized, but you know what I mean, like to talk about family separation in and immigrants in a dignified way and not kind of labeling them as criminals and things like that. But also take care of yourself, drink your water, go touch some grass, because we are in, as a millennial, I'm really tired of living in unprecedented times, but we are living in unprecedented times, it feels like, especially with the new tools. Even though we've seen these types of patterns before, we're dealing with like new tools in these patterns, especially with the weaponization of technology and things like that. So it's really important to take care of yourself and be very vigilant about your behaviors online and things like that. So I'll leave it there.
Um, that was amazing. I loved all your recommendations, personally. I feel like those are things to live by. So there's 40, this 170 billion for immigration enforcement, 45 billion specifically for detention. What is that going to look like? It feels overwhelming. Everyone's just like, oh, this is it. It's a done deal. Like it doesn't have to be a done deal. Like it was what I was talking about before. We think a lot about particular laws changing and now potentially a lot of money going to this thing, but again, they need to still build up that infrastructure. They need to build up new detention centers or go into new detention center contracts or have new contracts with local police and all these other things. And so the thing I'll say is that at least we work with groups all across the country who are trying to either close down an existing detention center or stop a new one from coming in. And there's a lot of different strategies with the Everglades detention camp, which, has been deemed alligator Alcatraz. Already litigation's been filed by Friends of the Everglades. We're working with folks there to call attention to what's happening because they're going to try to build a bunch more of those. And so like, what can we do to kind of expose how bad things are and intervene really quickly? I do think there are some strategies, especially when they're using a lot of Bureau of Prisons facilities. They used recently a state prison in Alaska to detain people. They use county jails everywhere. All those actually, there's much more opportunity for intervention versus some of the private prisons where they just have this like way of doing things. But again, they haven't like all this stuff hasn't happened yet. Like we're at 57,000 people in detention. They want to get up to 100,000 or more at any given time. But for years, like I say this all the time, for years, I've been working against immigration detention since I was living in Texas, since after, 9/11 and the Bush era and that period of time when there was essentially a prison boom happening at the border for immigrants. And we just lost for years and years. We just lost every campaign. And it was like a constant losing. And then all of a sudden, there was an opening. And it was because of the Black Lives Matter movement. It was because of, the response to having a global pandemic. It was because of those stories about what was happening with forced gynecological procedures on women at the Irwin County detention centers. All those things came together and we had an opening and we were able to end contracts at some 20 facilities. It was incredible to see. And it was because of at the both the local and state level, but also at the federal level. And so we have to do that sort of spade work right now, like build up, make sure that we're doing the work locally to stop these facilities, to build up. And there is going to be another opening for us. And so I think right now it's the time to kind of gear up, do that work. We are probably going to lose some campaigns, but we might win some as well. And at some point we could win even bigger if we really hold on to our values and our principles and a lot of what we talked about in this conversation right now. So I think that's what I'll say. And I think this is the time to focus on protecting people as much as possible. And so that work locally, there's, Siembra out of North Carolina has this great tool called Defend and Recruit, where you can set up ICE watches in your community. So there's things you can do locally as an individual. You don't have to spend all your time doing this, even like 5 hours a week, 3 hours a week, like something to kind of help community. And then doing the work to make sure you're pushing back against expansion. And we have a lot of tools. We're relaunching our Community It's Not Cages campaign tomorrow. So we'll be sending out more and more tools around that.
I should have went first because Zeta and Silky were way more positive than I think that I'm gonna end it on. Like how's fascism treating me today? So I think that it's like one of those things where, I mean, I know whatever, it's no secret that I'm directly affected. I'm at risk. And I think the conversations and there are family members that are too. So I think the conversations are a little bit differently. I mean, I think we're trying to normalize, right, so that we can move forward with um, family members that are being taken and who will probably end up out of here. There's a random fact that I learned about ants when they go into a farm. One of the first things that they do is that they build a cemetery. And what that does is that it allows them to understand that at some point, um, we are going to lose people, right? And with $170 billion, right, we are going to. I think someone had mentioned Gaza, what's happening in Sudan. I was born in Sudan, and listening to those family members and understanding how they are getting through it, right? And I think hearing that about ants and understanding that, I'm like, okay, that's where we start, right? We understand that we are going to lose people, right? But that should give us the fortitude, right? And what that does is that in the absence of fear, there is courage. And I think that I've been inspired by other people's courage. And I think that I would like that to be contagious, right? I know someone had sort of said something about their, I think on the chat around, how do we get over the criminalization aspect, right? With my family members, my communities who've been hit with crimes. We are part of that 6%, right? That 20%. And it always reminds me of a Henry David Thoreau quote where he says, "A society that prisons unjustly, the only place for a just person is in a prison," right? So I'm stocking up on cigarettes, you know what I mean? Ramen noodles is back on the menu. But again, I mean, and I don't mean that in like a weird way, but I just mean that like, we have to sort of get ready, right? I mean, we all have to understand that, you know, that get ready for the fight, essentially. And I think that one ways that I've been looking at it is to be open to alternative family structures, right? Understanding that coming from a 30-year war myself as an Eritrean, and understanding that there were people who my mom had raised me, she wasn't even my mom. I was like, okay, that's fine. But coming from a place of war, that understanding that we've got to think about love in a different way. We've got to think about courage in a different way. We've got to think about determination in a different way. Like these are things, right? That will help us get through this and make sure that our spirit is still intact after all of this, right? Um, and obviously get involved in your community, join a group, try to do some KYRs. That's always helpful, right? And how important that, solidarity in a real way, right? Not looking at this as just allies, but really right now, I think what I need and what my community need is like family and friends, right? For us to like switch that thinking of really being like, this is no longer just a political campaign that we're trying to win together. This is no longer just sort of the work that I do, right? Or whatever it is. Like this is actually very real, right? And I think to let our children, right, understand that when they walk into a room that we have that courage and that determination, and that we laugh at those that are trying to break our spirits, right? And we make sure that they understand that those that are taking our family members are essentially cowards, and that we don't stand, and that we don't back down to bullies, right? And so I feel that to me is has been helpful, right? For us to get through it. Yeah, just, I mean, fuck these cowards is how I want to end it. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for inviting me to this.
Thank you. That was amazing. We've gotten some questions. We have about 10 minutes left. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, but speaking of the fight, we did get a question about some strategies folks find useful in pushing against undeputized vigilantes, specifically ICE, and the mobilization of militias. So if that question resonates with any of you and you'd like to take some time to answer it, we have a few minutes.
So just to be clear about that question, it's like, how do we fight against vigilantism, the way that ICE is moving? And it's crazy because it's like, And Suki, I said this before, like I haven't been working in this too long. It's been 15 years, right? But if there was ever gonna be a Gestapo or a rogue agency in the United States, ICE was primed for it, right? Because they came out in 2003 as Department of Homeland Security, right on the war on terror. ICE is an organization, an agency that is again perfect for being a president's personalized army, right? They do things that other law enforcement agencies don't have to do. Take it back a second. To enforce immigration, you could only do it through racial profiling, right? The way that they're doing it, right? You could just only do it there. So for those of you that are citizens, I would start making ramen noodles today too, because we don't know who they're gonna take and the way that they are moving. They don't even take race data they're the only law enforcement agency that does not, right? I think one thing to really understand at this point, and even for those that are antisocial and introverts, and I know like this is gonna hurt, but get to know the people around you, right? Ask a double, how's your family? Right? When you've got the fruit stand folks, when you're walking into bodegas in Brooklyn, right? Like this is a time to really start to understand, right, who you are around, right? All of the things that we had learned sort of before about with our Know Your Rights, about like this is how ICE does it or whatever have you, we have got to sort of like shift that, right? And I think even for me in this fight against these cowards for like it's gonna be a while. Hopefully, I'm here to be able to help out with it. Is like understanding that they're moving in ways that we don't. And I'll give a quick example. Like I created an app that scans warrants, right? It'll tell you if it's an administrative warrant, so you don't let them in. It'll tell you if it's a judicial warrant, right? So that you can let them in, right? Easy peasy, right? But I also know they're not showing warrants, right? So does that mean that I throw this thing out of the water? I'm like, oh yeah. But the Fourth Amendment still exists, even if they're moving the way that they are, right? I like that, Zaina. I did see that wiggle there. It exists whether or not they're using it or violating it, right? Like that's why we had to have a whole second civil rights movement, right? These things like to be able to understand those that are around you, those that you see every day, get equipped as you possibly can, right? And that's why we call it know your rights and not exercise your rights. Know the rights that they are violating, right? And that's where we're at right now, 6 months in. Hopefully in 6 months, when somebody asks that question, we'll have a better answer, right? But just, close ranks, get to know the people around you. And we're still kind of in a phase of using our old tactics that have worked, but then also monitoring the situation very heavily so that we can learn how they're moving. That's it.
Silky or Zaina, do you want to share anything?
I feel like Abe covered it. I feel like I'm the type of person who's just like so focused on the law enforcement and how it's operating. And that's the thing. I mean, there is, I agree with everything that Abraham said, but I do think that like ICE's ability to do this is their ability to work with other law enforcement too. Like they're much more capable of it. And like that's why it's actually been hard for them because there's really great sanctuary policy in places like Illinois and why they're resorting to having Marines come out in Los Angeles and California. So like I do think that there's, they're extending it more. It like the military industrial complex and prison industrial complex, like accepting ICE for what it is actually changing these other systems and these other entities as well. Like so much of like a lot of the work I'm trying to do or at Detention Watch Network is say, hey, look, like the role of prisons and policing in the US has made immigration enforcement that much more worse. And that's why we are in these conditions. But also, like in this moment, seeing actually the sort of obsession with mass deportation is changing prisons and policing in the US and changing the way the military operates. And I think those are things we have to reckon with as well. That didn't at all answer the question, just random thoughts.
Your random thoughts are appreciated. Thank you all. We only have 4 minutes left, so I'm just going to close us off. Thank you all again for being here, for joining, for sharing. I know it's a really bad and hard time, and I really appreciate you taking this extra time and this labor to be here with us. And thank you everyone for joining. I hope that you all can continue to take care of yourselves in the ways that feel best for you. We will be sending a recording out to all of those who registered. It will include the link to the play space as well, which has some documents, toolkits, and some of the thoughts and questions and the ways that people engaged with the content. And then just a reminder that we have the final Breaking Webinars, Breaking Silos webinar series on August 12th, which is on community care models to disrupt poverty, criminalization, and family separation. The link to register for that webinar will be in an email coming shortly. So I hope you can join us then. And again, thank you so much. If you need any of us, you know where to reach us, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you all.